welcome to the Cine Flux. Sit with me for a moment before we begin, because what I want to talk about today is not just a film, it is a question. A question about what we are made of when everything we thought was keeping us upright has been pulled away. When I first pressed play on this one, I was not quite prepared for the conversation it wanted to have. Not with the genre, not with the landscape, and not entirely with me. So pour something warm, settle in, and let us walk into this one together. This is the Cine Flux, and today we are talking about Apex. There is a particular kind of film that only arrives when cinema and culture are moving in a specific direction together. And to understand Apex, the 2026 Netflix thriller directed by Baltasar Kormákur, you need to understand the moment it walked into. We have been living for the better part of this decade through a renaissance of what I would call the body film. The film that asks not what a character thinks or believes or feels in the abstract, but what a human body, specifically a woman's body, is capable of enduring. This is not simply about action cinema in the traditional sense, it is something deeper and more culturally loaded than that. Because for most of cinema's history, the woman in the wilderness story was a story about vulnerability, about what would happen to her, about the terror of her helplessness. The camera watched her suffer. The narrative organized itself around her rescue or her loss, and then something shifted. You can feel it happening across the early years of this decade. You can trace it through a lineage of films and performances that began insisting on a different conversation. The conversation that says, what if the body we are watching is not defined by its fragility, but by its refusal? What if the story we are telling is not about what is done to her, but about what she does back? Mad Max Fury Road did not create this conversation, but it crystallized it. Charlize Theron's Furiosa, stoic, ferocious, moving through a broken world with the tireless energy of someone who has long stopped waiting to be saved, became something of a touchstone for a generation of filmmakers and audiences who wanted survival cinema to mean something different. Atomic Blonde pushed it further into the realm of gorgeous, brutal craft. The old guard found a mythological register for it. And then there was a long stretch of films that tried to follow this energy and landed somewhere more cautious, more formulaic, more interested in the idea of the capable woman than in doing the genuine creative work of building one. Apex arrives in the middle of that reckoning. It arrives on Netflix, which is its own cultural statement, that choice of platform at the moment when streaming survival thrillers have become almost their own subgenre, distinct from theatrical releases in their rhythm, their intimacy, their willingness to be efficient rather than epic. Netflix audiences have grown accustomed to a certain kind of lean, functional thriller, competent, watchable, largely forgettable. What Apex is trying to do, what it partially succeeds in doing, and partially stumbles around, is take that familiar form and fill it with something rawer. Something that breathes with the actual weight of grief and the actual texture of rock and water and cold air. Critically, the film landed somewhere in the middle of the conversation. A 66% on the tomato meter tells you something important. This is not a film that critics dismissed. It is a film that critics responded to in genuinely divided ways. Some found it thrillingly lean, others found it emotionally hollow beneath its stunning surface. The audience response was similarly split, enormous viewership in its opening weeks, reportedly pulling close to 80 million views, which tells you there is appetite here. There is genuine interest. There is a reason people came. But the popcorn meter sitting at 48% tells you that when they arrived, something in the experience did not quite close the distance between what the film promised and what it delivered. That gap between promise and delivery, between what the film reaches for and what it actually grasps, is exactly what I want to spend our time inside today. Because here is the thing about Apex that keeps pulling at me. It is a film that occasionally transcends its genre with real grace and then retreats from that transcendence almost as quickly as it achieves it. It is a film that contains moments of genuine spatial and emotional beauty, moments where the landscape becomes a psychological state, where the camera finds something true about a person at the edge of themselves, and then surrounds those moments with machinery that is efficient but not entirely alive. It is the gap between a great film and a good one. And that gap, I think, is worth examining carefully, not to diminish what the film achieves, but because the space between those two things is where the most interesting questions lay. It is also worth noting the awards conversation, or more accurately, the absence of one. Apex was not positioned as awards season 5. It arrived in April, a month that tends towards spectacle rather than ceremony. Its cinematographer, Lawrence Sher, Academy Award nominated, the mind behind Joker's visual landscape, will almost certainly be in conversations as the year progresses because what he does with drone photography and natural light in the Blue Mountains of New South Wales is genuinely remarkable. Whether the broader academic conversation catches up to this film is another matter, but the visual achievement here is real and it deserves to be recognized on those terms. Does the film feel of its time, or does it reach for something timeless? That is one of the questions I keep returning to, and I think the honest answer is both, in different proportions. Its premise: a woman hunted in the wilderness by a man who has decided that the natural world licenses his violence, is as old as turtling. But the specific register in which Apex tells that story, the specific cultural conversation it is participating in, the particular way it frames the body and the landscape as co-protagonists in the same drama that feels very much like 26. Whether the film will be watched in 20 years as a survival classic or as a well-made artifact of its moment, I genuinely do not know. What I do know is that it is asking the right questions even when it is not always finding the most satisfying answers. Let us talk about the film itself. Apex is a 2026 survival action thriller directed by the Icelandic filmmaker Baltasar Kormákur and written by Jeremy Robbins in his narrative feature debut. It stars Charlize Theron as Sasha, a competitive climber and extreme sports athlete who finds herself transformed by loss and then, almost immediately, thrust into a situation that demands everything that loss has stripped away from her. Taron Egerton plays Ben, the man who decides she is his prey. Eric Bana plays Tommy, the man whose death sets the entire story into motion. The film is set across two countries and two entirely different registers of landscape: the sheer ice-covered face of Norway's Troll Wall, which opens the film in a sequence of vertigo and violence, and then the vast, ancient, indifferent Australian wilderness, which becomes the film's true arena and its deepest character. Cinematographer Lawrence Shea shoots both locations with a precision that feels almost documentary in its intimacy. There is a real sense throughout that the camera is inside the danger with the actors, not watching from a safe distance. Genre-wise, Apex sits in the tradition of the hunt in the wilderness thriller, a tradition that goes back to Richard Connell's 1924 short story, The Most Dangerous Game, which has been adapted in various registers countless times since. But Kormakur and Robbins are not simply revisiting that structure for its own sake. They are using it to ask a specific question: what does a woman who has already lost everything have left to lose? And what does that condition, that particular state of grief and guilt and emptiness, reveal about the nature of survival itself? Konmaku is a director whose entire career has been organized around the body in extremis: Everest, Adrift, Beast, Two Guns. He is one of the most consistent and underappreciated directors of physical cinema working today, a filmmaker who understands that the body in danger is not just a spectacle, it is a philosophical condition. The skin that bleeds, the muscle that burns, the lungs that cannot get enough air, these are not effects in a Kormakur film, they are arguments. They are the film's way of saying, here is what it costs to be alive. Here is what the world actually asks of us. For a film like this, starring Charlize Theron, an actor whose own commitment to physical performance has become something of a defining characteristic of her career, Kormakur is genuinely the right director. And the combination of these two sensibilities, his and hers, is one of the reasons the film works as well as it does. There is a shared language between them, a shared understanding of what it means to take the body seriously as a site of meaning. What kind of story is this at its heart? On its surface, it is a hunt film, a she still a survival thriller, but underneath that engine is something quieter, something about guilt as a weight the body carries, something about grief as both a wound and a weapon. Something about what we become when the ordinary scaffolding of a human life has collapsed and we are left with only the most elemental version of ourselves. That is the film Apex wants to be. And in its best moments, it is exactly that film. Should you watch it? If you came to this channel because you feel cinema rather than just watch it, the answer is yes, with clear eyes about what you are getting. This is not a film that will remake your understanding of the form. It is not Sicario in the wilderness. It is not a film that will follow you out of the room and sit with you at 3 in the morning. But it is a film with genuine craft in it, genuine physical commitment, and two performances, one extraordinary and one deeply complicated, that makes the experience worth your 95 minutes. Go see it first if you have not, because we are going deep today, and some things, as I always say here, deserve to be felt before they are understood. Let me tell you about the first time I sat with this film. I came to Apex with a specific set of expectations, and I want to be honest about what those were. Because I think my expectations were shaped by exactly the cultural moment I described in our opening, and understanding what I brought into the room with me is part of understanding what the film then chose to do with that. I expected a slick thriller. I expected the kind of Netflix survival film that moves efficiently, looks expensive, delivers its set pieces with competence and its emotions with compression, the kind of film that is satisfying in the moment and fades cleanly by morning. I expected Charlize Theron to be formidable because she's always formidable, but I expected her formidability to function as spectacle more than as meaning. I expected Taron Egerton to play a villain in the way that charming British actors sometimes play villains, with a kind of theatrical enjoyment, a wink at the audience, a performance that entertains without truly unsettling. And I expected Baltasar Kormákur to do what Kormakur does well, to find real locations, to press the camera close to the body, to make the physical world feel genuinely dangerous and three-dimensional. Some of those expectations were met, some were exceeded in specific and surprising ways, and some were met in ways that ended up revealing the film's limitations more clearly than its strengths. But here is what I did not expect. I did not expect the opening sequence to do what it does to me, and I want to spend some real time here. Because the opening of Apex is the film at its most purely confident, the sequence in which Kormakur and cinematographer Lawrence Sher and the editing of Sigurdur Eithorsen are all working in absolute concert. And the result is something that goes beyond craft into genuine emotional architecture. The film begins before we have any context, before we know who these people are, before we know where we are, before the title card has arrived, or any narrative information has been handed to us. It begins with a body suspended against a surface of pure vertical stone. The camera does not give us the mountain first and then find the climber within it. It does the more interesting and more psychologically precise thing. It starts with the texture of fingers against rock, skin and stone. The intimate scale of a human hand negotiating a surface that is not meant to be touched in this way, and then it pulls back and back and back, and the full enormity of what we are looking at becomes gradually, terrifyingly clear. What struck me in that sequence, what I keep returning to as the purest expression of what this film understands when it is at its best, is the way it frames human ambition. Because this is not a sequence about danger, exactly, or rather, it is about danger as the price you willingly pay for a particular kind of aliveness. Sasha is not here by accident. She is not a victim of circumstance. She is here because she has chosen this. Because the ordinary altitude of human experience is not for her sufficient. She needs height. She needs the razor edge of the possible, and the film establishes this before it establishes anything else about her, which means that everything we later learn about her grief and her guilt and her hunger for self-punishment arrives already filtered through this foundational truth. She is a person who goes toward the thing that frightens her rather than away from it. Think about what that means for the rest of the film. Think about how much of the story's logic depends on this being established not just as information, but as a felt reality in the body. If we did not understand viscerally, physically, in our own nervous systems, that Sasha is someone for whom the threshold between danger and aliveness is located somewhere most of us would find terrifying, then her decision to enter the Australian wilderness alone against the explicit warning after 5 months of grief and guilt would read as foolish or reckless or narratively convenient. Instead, it reads as character, as a specific and deeply human kind of self knowledge, even when that self knowledge is not entirely healthy. The portaledge tent that Tommy and Sashi have somehow suspended on the vertical face of the mountain, sleeping 90 degrees to the world, the open air beneath them. The rock face beside them is one of the most audacious visual ideas in the film. And again, what I keep returning to is not the spectacle of it, though the spectacle is undeniable. What I keep returning to is what it says about how these two people have organized their lives. They have made a home in the space where other people would see only a void. They have domesticated the impossible. They sleep peacefully in the place that would send most of us into paralysis. And the film shows us this not with commentary or explanation, but simply by letting the image sit there and breathe and mean whatever it means to you. Because here is what the film understands in that moment, even if it does not always sustain this understanding throughout its runtime, that the most interesting survival films are not really about the body surviving. They are about the self surviving, about which version of yourself you carry out of the wilderness, about whether the person who walks back through the tree line is the same person who walked into it, or whether something has been altered at a level you cannot name or reverse. And then the storm arrives. I want to be careful here about how I describe what happens next, because the film's opening act is the clearest example of its screenplay working exactly as it should, economically, emotionally, with real intelligence about what it is setting up. Jeremy Robbins was a first time narrative feature writer when this script landed on the 2021 Blacklist, which is the annual industry survey of the best unproduced screenplays in Hollywood. That detail matters. It means that this story, the bare bones of it, the essential architecture, was recognized as something worth making years before a camera ever turned. And you can feel in the opening act why. There is a confidence in the storytelling economy here, a willingness to let the story do its work through action and consequence rather than through dialogue and explanation. What happens on the troll wall is not just a tragedy. It is the specific, named, unbearable tragedy of a mistake made under pressure in a situation where there is no margin for mistakes. Sasha forgets to secure the ropes, the avalanche hits, Tommy falls, and the weight of that, the weight of him, literally and metaphorically, becomes a choice that she has to make in real time, in the cold, on the side of a mountain that does not care whether she lives or dies. She releases the rope, she survives, and the film does something very intelligent in how it handles the immediate aftermath of this moment. It does not give us her grief as a performance. It does not show us the crying, the collapse, the operatic processing of loss. It shows us a body that has survived and does not yet know what to do with that fact. There is a kind of numbness in Taron's performance in these early minutes that I found more affecting than tears would have been, a quality of interior silence of a person in whom the emotional mechanism has temporarily seized up and is running on something more primal than feeling. She moves, she breathes, she continues, and the film trusts us to understand what that continuation costs. 5 months pass. This is a gap that the film holds quietly, and I think it is the right choice. We do not see the 5 months. We do not see the funerals, the condolence calls, the empty apartment at 3 in the morning. We arrive into the aftermath. We find Sasha driving toward a national park in Australia, a fictional place called Wandara, remote and vast and threaded with the kind of wildness that does not acknowledge human presence as anything other than temporary, and we understand from the quality of her silence, from the particular emptiness behind her eyes, that these 5 months have not healed anything. They have only compressed it further, packed it tighter, made it smaller and denser and heavier. The ranger who warns her not to proceed alone, who tells her with the casual seriousness of someone who has said this many times and has never yet managed to prevent the outcome, is one of those small supporting performances that a film either gets exactly right or completely wastes. Here, the moment is handled with efficiency. We understand the warning, we understand that she hears it as information rather than instruction, and we understand in the way she dismisses it that she is not being reckless. She is being intentional. She is going into the wilderness because the wilderness is the only place that has ever told her the truth about herself. And now we need to talk about what happens inside that wilderness, because this is where the film's story becomes fully and without reservation an experience rather than a plot. The Australian landscape in Apex is not set dressing, it is not backdrop, it is not the pretty frame around a story that could have been told anywhere. Kormakur was explicit about this in interviews during the film's production, reportedly saying that no other country in the world could have taken the place of Australia as the primary location for this film, that the terrain was as much a character as any actor on set. And when you watch the film with that understanding, you begin to see how deeply the geography organizes everything else. The Blue Mountains of New South Wales, where principal photography took place starting in February of 2025, have a specific quality that distinguishes them from other wilderness landscapes in cinema. They are ancient in a way that feels almost illogical in its indifference to the human landscape. The rock here has been shaping itself for hundreds of millions of years. The gullies and ravines and crevasses and cliff faces have a complexity and depth that defeats casual mapping. You cannot know this landscape the way you might know a city or a valley or even a more hospitable forest. You can only enter it and discover incrementally what it is willing to show you. For Sasha, this is not a disadvantage, it is the point. She has come to a place she cannot pre-know because all the places she already knows carry the specific weight of Tommy in them. Every familiar landscape is haunted. Every known geography is a container of memory. The wilderness offers the one thing that grief sometimes needs above all else: genuine unknowing. The present tense, the here and the now, in the immediate, stripped of everything that the memory attaches to familiar places. And then Ben finds her. I want to be deliberate about how I approach this character, because Taron Egerton's performance as Ben is one of the most genuinely interesting and genuinely frustrating things about Apex, and the way I feel about what he does here is complicated in ways that I think are worth unpacking rather than simply resolving. Because this is one of the places where the film both succeeds and fails simultaneously, and understanding how that is possible tells you something important about the gap between what Apex achieves and what it could have been. Ben is at the level of genre mechanics a type. He is the wilderness predator, the man who has retreated so far from the ordinary social contract that he has constructed in its place a private mythology of violence and ritual and dominance. He is the kind of character who exists in this genre to embody a specific argument that certain men, left to the elements and to their own worst impulses, were wrought into a kind of caveman psychopathy, a regression to something pre-civilized and pre-human that the ordinary structures of society usually keep contained. What Egerton does with this type is, in places, extraordinary, and in other places it is the film's single most significant missed opportunity. Let me explain both sides of that carefully. The extraordinary part first. There are moments in Egerton's performance where Ben achieves something that genuinely disturbed me in the best possible way. Moments where his cheerfulness is more frightening than his fury, where his apparent delight in the chase functions as a kind of horror precisely because it is not performed as horror. He is not telegraphing menace in those moments. He is simply a man who has found the thing that makes him feel most alive, and he is enjoying it with the uncomplicated enthusiasm of someone doing what they were made to do. And that quality, that ease, that comfort, that almost pastoral contentment in the act of violence is genuinely chilling in a way that raging villainy rarely is. One critic noted that he gives Ben the character of a progressively unhinged movie monster you can nonetheless map onto other men you might know, and that observation cuts to exactly what is most interesting about a performance at its best. The horror of Ben is not that he is incomprehensible, it is that he is recognizable. That distance between his psychology and the psychology of a certain kind of man who never quite found his place in the ordinary world is shorter than we would like to believe. That the wilderness did not create this violence, it only removed the structures that were keeping it politely contained. But here is where the frustration begins. Because the screenplay does not give Egerton, and Egerton, to his credit, is working harder than the screenplay perhaps deserves, the tools to build that recognition into something truly resonant. The backstory of Ben, such as it is, remains frustratingly thin. We understand what he does. We understand how he does it. We are given just enough to understand in outline why the wilderness has become his domain. But we are not given the full interior life of this person, the specific wound or hunger or distortion that made him into what he is. And without that, he remains for long stretches of the film a function rather than a person. Efficient, frightening, technically accomplished as a character, but not quite three-dimensional. Not quite someone who lives and breathes independently of the plot that requires him. This matters because the film's central dynamic, the thing it is really trying to do, depends on the relationship between Sasha and Ben having genuine psychological depth. This is not simply a woman running from a man who wants to kill her, or rather, it is that, but it needs to be something else at the same time. It needs to be a confrontation between two people who have both been shaped by the wilderness in profound ways, who have both built their identities around the edge of survival, but who have arrived at completely opposite understandings of what surviving means and what it demands of you. Sasha's relationship with danger is organized around love, around the idea that you go to the extremes of the possible because it connects you to other people, to the person climbing beside you, to the community of those who understand what it means to be at that altitude. Her extreme sports life, as the film establishes it in those opening Norwegian minutes, is not a solitary pursuit. It is a shared language, a love language even. Ben's relationship with danger, by contrast, is organized around domination, around the idea that the purpose of the wilderness is to reveal hierarchies, that the natural world exists to show you who is truly at the top of the chain, and that the only honest way to live is to act out that hierarchy with complete commitment. He has decided that the social contract is a lie told to keep the weak safe and the strong tamed, and the wilderness for him is the place where that lie does not apply. When these two understandings collide, Sasha's love organized courage against Ben's hurriedly organized violence, the film achieves something real, something that goes beyond chase mechanics and into genuine philosophical friction. And in its best sequences, Apex is exactly the film that friction promises. The geography tightens, as one critic beautifully observed. The crevasses, the cliff faces, the narrow passages, and with it the tension, yes, but also the meaning. The space becomes a moral landscape. The physical challenge becomes a question about what kind of person you are and what kind of world you believe you are living in. The pacing of the middle section of Apex is something I want to talk about carefully because it is both the film's greatest structural achievement and in places its greatest structural weakness. And I do not think those two things are contradictory. I think they are actually the same choice producing two different kinds of results. Kormakur's decision to keep the film lean, 95 minutes, almost nothing wasted, no indulgence in backstory or digression or the kind of emotional processing that a lesser thriller would bad with, is philosophically consistent with his entire approach to physical cinema. If you have seen Everest, you will recognize this instinct immediately. Kormakur believes that the body in the present tense is more cinematic than the mind in the past. He is interested in what is happening now, in the immediate, in the moment of decision. He is not interested in the committee meeting where someone explains how we got here. In different action sequences, this produces results that are genuinely exhilarating. There is a quality of presence in the best Apex set pieces, a feeling of genuine physical risk, genuine stakes, genuine consequence that is increasingly rare in contemporary action cinema, where so much is rendered in visual effects and so little seems to cost the body anything. When Sasha falls into a river and the current takes her, the scene does not play a spectacle. It plays as a person negotiating with a force that is larger and faster and less forgiving than anything she has encountered before. And the camera, that small, mobile, actor close drawn camera that Cher developed specifically for this film, puts us inside that negotiation in a way that is almost uncomfortably intimate. You feel the cold, you feel the panic beneath the pragmatism, you feel in your own body the specific kind of exhaustion that comes not from effort but from the absolute refusal to stop. But in the quieter connective tissue between the action sequences, the leanness becomes something closer to thinness. The film rushes through moments that deserve to breathe. It moves past emotional turns that want more space. There is a quality in some of the middle passages of Apex that I can only describe as impatience, as if the film is uncomfortable with stillness, with the interior life of its characters, with the kind of silence in which meaning accumulates, rather than the kind in which it simply waits for the next explosion. And this is where I begin to feel the gap between what Apex is and what Apex could have been. Because the premise is rich enough, the performances are committed enough, the landscape is vast enough to carry a film that was willing to slow down more often, to sit inside Sasha's psychology not just in moments of crisis but in the moments between them, to let Ben become truly three-dimensional rather than brilliantly functional, to let the Australian wilderness do the thing that wilderness does in the best survival films, become a mirror, become the external landscape that reflects the internal one. Terrence Malick understood this. Werner Herzog understood it. Even in the more commercial register, films like A Most Violent Year or Leave No Trace understood it. The landscape is not just where the story happens. The landscape is what the story is about. And Apex knows this in its best moments. It is right there in the film's DNA, in the way Kormakur speaks about the terrain in every interview, in the way Lauren Sher frames the sky and the rock and the water as participants rather than backdrops. But the screenplay does not always give the film permission to live fully inside that understanding. The choice to move from the Troll Wall prologue, which is set in Norway, vast and white and vertical, to the Blue Mountains world, which is ancient and red and horizontal, is one of the film's genuinely great structural decisions. These are not just two different locations, they are two different philosophical registers. The Norwegian sequence is about altitude, about ascent, about the human hunger to go up, to reach the highest point, to be at the apex, and about the price of that hunger when the conditions turn against you. The Australian sequence is about endurance, about horizontal persistence, about moving through harder than moving up, about the long, unglamorous, absolutely necessary work of continuing. Sasha's movement from one landscape to the other is, in this reading, a kind of involuntary education. She has been the vertical person, the person for whom success was defined by elevation, by the peak, by the apex of the possible. The wilderness does not reward that orientation. The wilderness requires something different. The ability to navigate complex three-dimensional space at ground level, to read terrain that is not organized around a single direction of travel, to find your way through rather than your way up. And what is quietly remarkable, what I keep returning to as one of the film's most intelligent structural choices, is that Ben understands this. Ben has organized his entire violence around this horizontal clamor. He does not come from above, he comes from within. He is already inside the landscape in a way that Sasha is not, and his tactical advantage in the early sections of the film is not physical superiority but something closer to environmental fluency. He knows this space. He has read every crevasse and every river bend and every cave mouth, and that familiarity is its own kind of threat. Perhaps the most unsettling kind, because it means the very landscape that Sasha has come to for clarity has already been colonized by the thing that wants to kill her. There is no safe ground here. That is what the film is saying. Not as a thriller convention, not as a genre mechanic, but as a genuine observation about a specific kind of grief, the grief of discovering that the spaces you had imagined as refuge are already occupied by the worst version of what you were running from. And this is where the film begins to reach for its deepest material, where it begins to ask the question that, in the best possible version of Apex, would be the question at the absolute center of the film. What does a woman who has already survived the worst thing she can imagine have left to fear? Because here is what is actually happening in the second act of Apex. Beneath the chase mechanics and the set pieces and the efficient genre plotting, Sasha is not just trying to survive Ben, she is trying to figure out whether she deserves to. The guilt of Tommy's death, the specific guilt of a mistake that she made, a rope she forgot to secure, a choice you had to make in the cold on the side of a mountain, is not background texture in this film. It is the emotional engine. It is the reason she came to the wilderness alone. And it is the reason I think that her survival of Ben is not simply a physical triumph, but a psychological one, a renegotiation of her relationship with her own right to continue. The film does not spell this out. It is not that kind of film, and I think that is largely the right call. The explicit articulation of this theme would tip the film from thriller into therapy, which would be a mistake. But it threads the theme through the action with a subtle hand, and in the moments where the thread is most tightly pulled, Apex becomes something genuinely moving. There is a moment, and I am being careful here not to reveal exactly where it falls or what precipitates it, where Sasha has the option to stop fighting, where the geography and the injury and the exhaustion have conspired to make surrender feel like the only remaining option. And in that moment, the film is not asking whether she can survive physically, it is asking whether she wants to. Whether the version of herself that still exists after Tommy, after the row, after the 5 months of silence and the solo drive into the wilderness, is the version she is willing to fight for. That moment is the film's emotional center of gravity. It is the moment around which everything else orbits, even when the film is moving too fast to let the orbit settle into the full arc it deserves. And Charlize Theron plays it with a specificity and an interior precision that is quite simply the best thing she has done in some time. I want to talk about Theron's performance at more length in the next section, where we will look at the craft of this film in detail. But let me say this here, in the context of the story as experience, she does not play Sasha as a hero. She plays her as a person whose extraordinary physical capability is entirely real and entirely earned, but whose emotional capability, her ability to be present to her own pain rather than simply driving through it, is the thing that is being tested in this film. The physical challenge of Apex is the frame. The emotional challenge is the picture inside it. And here is where the film shifts completely. Because there comes a moment well into the second act, after several sequences of chase and confrontation and survival that have established the basic rhythm and grammar of the hunt, when Sasha stops being hunted and begins, almost imperceptibly, to hunt. When the film tips from a story about a woman trying to survive into a story about a woman choosing to return, not retreating toward safety, but moving toward the thing that has been pursuing her. And in that shift, in the decision to become the apex rather than the quarry, is where the film's title finally ends itself. Because apex is not just a geographical term. It is not just the top of the mountain or the highest point of the arc. It is, in its deepest meaning, the predicate of a question: what is at the top of the chain? What survives when everything else has been stripped away? What persists when every layer of the social and the psychological and the comfortable has been peeled back by cold and exhaustion and the specific clarity of genuine danger? The film's answer, partial, complicated, not entirely satisfying but genuinely reached for, is that what survives is love. Not the love that was lost, not the love that fell from the mountain in Norway, but the love that made a risk worth taking in the first place. The love that said, "This is the life I want, at this altitude, with this risk, with this possibility of loss." The love that did not protect Tommy but that also was not destroyed when he fell. That is a complicated emotional argument for a 95-minute thriller to be making, and the film does not make it with complete success, but it makes it with real ambition. And in this genre, at this moment, with this set of commercial and cultural pressures on the storytelling, that ambition is itself worth recognizing and worth honoring. Every film that reaches for something greater than its genre deserves an honest accounting of the places where it falls short, not a prosecution, not a dismissal, an honest accounting. Because the most useful criticism is not the kind that simply catalogs failures, that is easy, and it is also essentially useless as a guide to understanding what a piece of art is attempting. The most useful criticism is the kind that traces the gap between ambition and achievement with enough precision that you can see, clearly and specifically, where the film loses its footing and why. That is what I want to do in this section of the essay, not to diminish Apex, but to see it clearly, to look at it without the softening that comes from enthusiasm and without the hardening that comes from disappointment, and to say with genuine accuracy, here is where this film does not fully become the film it wants to be. The first and most significant flaw in Apex is one that I have been circling throughout this essay without landing on it directly, and I think it is time to land on it. The screenplay underserves its own emotional architecture. Let me explain what I mean by that with some precision. Jeremy Robbins' script was recognized by the Blacklist for the quality of its structural architecture and its essential premise. And those qualities are real. The premise is strong, the structure is sound, the movement from Norway to Australia has a genuine emotional and philosophical logic to it that I have already spent considerable time admiring. But a strong premise and a sound structure are the skeleton of a story, not the story itself. What fills the skeleton, what gives it flesh and breath, and the quality of lived human experience is character development. And this is where the screenplay reveals its most significant limitation. Sasha Egerton is a character whose interiority is largely implied rather than built. We understand her in outline. She is defined by her physical capability, her grief, her guilt, and her determination. These are real qualities, and in Taron's hands they become genuinely dimensional. But the script does not consistently give Taron the material she needs to make Sasha's interior life fully known. The moments of emotional interiority, the pauses in the thriller mechanics where the film should be doing its deepest character work, are present, but they are compressed almost to the point of suggestion. The film knows that these moments need to exist. It makes space for them, but it does not always know what to put in them beyond the visual shorthand of a face in repose, a body at temporary rest, the implication of feeling without the full weight of it. This is partly a consequence of the lean runtime. 95 minutes is not a lot of space to build a complete human being and stage a survival thriller. But I do not think the runtime is the primary cause. I think the primary cause is a specific tendency in this screenplay toward exteriority, toward action and consequence rather than reflection and accumulation. Robbins is a first time narrative feature writer, and his instincts are, at their best, excellent. But the specific skill of building a character through silence and stillness and the gradual revelation of interior life, the skill that distinguishes a good screenplay from a genuinely great one, is a skill that takes time to develop, and in places you can feel its absence. Think about the 5 months between the Norway sequence and the Australia sequence. I noted earlier that the film does not show us those 5 months, and I said that I thought that was largely the right choice. I want to qualify that now, because I think the choice is right, but the execution of what follows it is not always sufficient. If you decide not to show the audience those 5 months of grief, if you trust the ellipsis, trust the gap, trust the audience to understand what 5 months of this kind of guilt does to a person, then you need to pay that trust back in the Australian sequences. You need to show us in how Sasha moves through the world in those early Australian minutes exactly what those 5 months have deposited in her. You need the body to carry the history that the narrative has declined to show. Taron does this well. She performs those 5 months in the quality of her stillness, in the specific gravity of her presence, in the way she receives the ranger's warning with the calm of someone for whom the concept of additional danger has temporarily lost its meaning. But the screenplay does not consistently support this work. There are several moments in the early Australian section where the writing pushes Sasha toward dialogue or behavior that reads as functional, that moves the plot forward efficiently without being emotionally truthful to the specific state of a person who has been carrying this specific weight for this specific amount of time. And in those moments, you feel the screenplay asking the actor to do what that should have been done on the page. The second significant flaw is the one I have already identified but want to develop more fully here because it is genuinely the film's most consequential structural problem, the underdevelopment of Ben. And I want to be careful to locate this criticism precisely because it is easy and wrong to simply say that the villain needed more backstory. More backstory is not always the answer. More backstory can be the enemy of menace. The moment you fully explain a villain, you begin the process of domesticating them, of making them comprehensible and therefore, in a certain register, safe. The problem with Ben is not that we need more information about him. The problem is that we need more interiority, more of the specific quality of consciousness, the texture of how this person experiences the world, the particular way his mind moves, the specific register in which he understands what he is doing and why. And this interiority does not need to be delivered through backstory or exposition. It can be delivered through behavior, to the specific choices a character makes in moments that the plot does not require them to make any particular choice, through the gestures and preferences and private rituals that reveal who a person is when no one is watching. Egerton finds some of this the dancing scene is the clearest example, and it is genuinely one of the film's most memorable sequences precisely because it reveals something about Ben that the mechanical thriller plotting would never have access. But it is isolated. It is a single revelation rather than the accumulated weight of many small ones. And because it is isolated, it reads as a character beat rather than as character as an interesting thing this person does, rather than as a window into the full dimensionality of who this person is. Here is what this cost the film narratively. The central tension of Apex, the tension that should, in the film's deepest version of itself, be not just physical but philosophical, depends on Ben being a genuine ideological opponent to Sasha, not just a physical threat. An intellectual and existential one, someone who has a coherent, internally consistent, deeply held understanding of what the world is and what human beings are and what survival means. An understanding that is wrong, that is morally repugnant, that is the organized expression of something genuinely dangerous, but that is real, that was built from something that has its own terrible logic. If Ben had that depth, the confrontations between him and Sasha would not just be about who survives physically. They would be about whose understanding of the world survives, about whether the world is what Ben believes it is, a hierarchy, a food chain, a place where the strong take what the weak cannot hold, or whether it is something else. Something that Sasha's love organized courage is arguing for, implicitly and physically and at great cost, throughout the film. That confrontation, in the film's most ambitious possible version, would have made Apex something genuinely rare, a survival thriller that is simultaneously a genuine philosophical debate conducted in the language of bodies and landscapes rather than words. The bones of that film are present in Apex. But the flesh of it, the specific fullness of character that would make the debate feel like more than genre mechanics dressed in interesting clothes, is not consistently there. Third flaw I want to name is tonal inconsistency. And this is perhaps the most difficult one to articulate precisely, because it is not the kind of problem that announces itself with a single clearly identifiable scene. It is more pervasive and more subtle than that. It is a quality of the film being at certain moments uncertain about what register it wants to inhabit. Apex is, at its most considered, a serious film, a film with genuine emotional and philosophical ambitions. A film that wants to use the survival thrillers as a vehicle for an argument about grief and guilt and the nature of human resilience. But it is also, at certain moments, a film that leans into the pleasures of the genre with an uncomplicated enthusiasm that sits uneasily next to its more serious aspirations. And the tension between these two orientations, between the film that wants to be an exploration and the film that wants to be entertainment, between the Kormakur who made Everest and the Kormakur who made Beast, is not always productively generated. Sometimes it is simply distracting. There are sequences in the film's second half, sequences that I will not describe in detail here because they occur late enough, to edge into spoiler territory, where the film suddenly accelerates into a register of almost gleeful action spectacle that the emotional groundwork of the first hour has not prepared you for. The tonal shift is abrupt enough to be briefly disorienting, not disorienting in the way that a bold tonal choice disorients, the way a film like Get Out moves between comedy and horror with deliberate purpose, but disorienting in the way that a film struggling to reconcile its competing instincts sometimes disorients. You feel the film choosing entertainment over meaning, not because meaning is absent, but because the film's nerve temporarily fails it. This is, I want to emphasize, a relative criticism. It is a criticism made against the standard of what the film's best passages establish is possible. Against the standard of a merely competent Netflix thriller, Apex is a significant achievement in every respect. It is only when you hold it against what it occasionally becomes, when you hold it against those alive moments I described in the previous section, that the tonal inconsistencies register as genuine flaws rather than simply as the ordinary roughness of any film attempting something difficult. The fourth flaw is smaller but worth naming. The supporting characters are almost entirely functional. Aaron Pedersen as the forest stranger, Matt Whelan and Rob Carton in smaller roles. These are competent performances of competent writing, but they are essentially delivery mechanisms for information and atmosphere rather than human beings with their own interior lives. In a film where the central relationship between Sasha and Ben is the primary emotional investment, supporting characters who exist only to advance the plot are not a fatal problem, but they do narrow the film's emotional range. They make the world of Apex feel smaller than it needs to be, more contained, more like a stage set for two principles other than a living world that those principles are moving through. The final flaw I want to address is physical credibility, and I want to be careful here because this is an area where I have complicated feelings. On one hand, a survival thriller that does not take the physical cost of what it is depicting seriously is a film that has broken the basic contract with its audience, and Apex mostly honors that contract. The injuries accumulate, the exhaustion is real. Taron's physicality throughout the film is grounded in the specific mechanics of how a trained athlete's body actually moves and responds to damage and depletion. The film is significantly more honest about physical cost than the vast majority of action cinema, but there are specific moments that reviewers have noted with varying degrees of charity where the gap between what the film asks us to believe and what physics and physiology actually permit becomes briefly visible. A trap that would realistically produce a particular kind of injury is followed by physical feats that would, in reality, be impossible with that injury. The film's commitment to physical honesty, which is genuinely admirable, wavers at specific plot required moments in ways that are more noticeable because the surrounding commitment is so high. It is the kind of problem that only surfaces in a film that has earned your trust in its physical world. Because if you had not been given reason to believe, you would not notice the moment of implausibility. Apex generates enough physical credibility to make its moments of physical compromise visible in a way that a less physically committed film would not. These are the flaws, they are real, they matter. And they are at the same time the flaws of a film that is reaching for something, flaws of ambition rather than flaws of indifference. The most boring films have no flaws that are worth discussing in detail because there is nothing in them that was attempting enough to fall short. Now let us go deeper. Let us go past the craft and past the criticism and past all the analytical machinery and ask the question that matters most. What is Apex actually saying? What is it trying to understand? What does it know? Not about survival thrillers or streaming platforms or the career trajectories of its stars, but about human experience. About what it means to be a person moving through a world that is larger and older and more powerful than any individual life. Here is what I keep returning to when I think about the emotional core of this film. Not the plot, not the performances, not the cinematography, just the essential human truth at the center of it, the thing that the film is organized around whether it always knows it or not. Apex is a film about the relationship between guilt and survival. Let me be specific about why I think that is the right formulation and what it actually means for how the film works emotionally. Guilt as an experience is fundamentally organized around the past. It is the past living in the present body. The thing that happened, the rope that was not secured, the choice that was made on the side of the mountain does not stay in the past where it belongs. It migrates forward, it colonizes the present, it changes the quality of every subsequent experience, not by making those experiences worse in any specific way, but by making them feel less earned, less deserved, by inserting between the person and any experience of genuine aliveness a question: do you have the right to feel this after what you did or did not do or forgot to do? Do you have the right to feel the sun and the wind and the acceleration of a body working at its fullest capacity? For Sasha, this question is not abstract. She is a person for whom the sense of deserving, of having earned her right to the specific joys and challenges she pursues, has always been bound up with the physical. She earns her aliveness through her body, through the difficulty and risk and commitment of what she does, and the guilt of Tommy's death has infected that earning mechanism. It has made the ordinary calculus, risk taken, experience deserved, feel fraudulent, because the last risk she took cost someone else their life. The Australian wilderness in this reading is not simply the setting of a survival story, it is the physical externalization of Sasha's guilt. The wilderness that wants to kill her is the guilt that wants to finish what started on the troll wall. Ben, the human predator who has organized his violence around the idea that some lives are simply more fit to survive than others, is the guilt given human form. He is the embodied argument that Sasha does not deserve to continue, that she made a mistake from which there is no recovery, that the natural order, the real order beneath the social one, is a hierarchy of worth, and that she is not at the top of it. Think about what that means for how the film's survival logic works. This is not a story about a capable person overcoming a dangerous situation through capability. It is a story about a person who has spent 5 months believing that she should not survive, that her guilt has revoked her claim on the future, discovering that she still wants to survive, discovering, in the specific and unignorable language of the body under threat, that the will to continue is not something the mind can revoke, that it is older than guilt, older than the specific human capacity for self-punishment, that it is the most fundamental property of a living thing, the orientation toward continuation, the bias toward the future, the refusal of the body to stop even when the mind has decided that stopping would be appropriate. And this is where the film reaches its genuine emotional insight. The thing it understands that, at its best, it communicates with real power. The insight is this: survival is not an endorsement, it is not a verdict. The fact that you survived does not mean that you deserve to survive more than the person who did not. It does not mean that the universe has weighed you both and found you more worthy. Survival is not a moral judgment, it is a physical fact. And the guilt that tries to make it into a moral judgment, that tries to retroactively revoke your right to the future on the grounds of past failure, is doing something to you that the universe itself is not doing. The wilderness does not know about Tommy. The river does not care about the rope. The Australian rock does not have an opinion about who deserved to fall and who deserved to survive. The natural world is, in this specific and crucial sense, innocent of the moral weight that grief and guilt are trying to assign to it. And Ben, who believes that the natural world is a moral order, a hierarchy of worth, a judge of fitness, is profoundly wrong. Not just morally wrong. Wrong about the fundamental nature of the world he has organized his life around. This is the film's deepest argument, and it is an argument that I find genuinely moving, even in the compressed and not always fully developed form in which Apex delivers it, because it is an argument that a lot of people in a lot of different kinds of grief need to hear. The argument that your survival is not a crime, that continuing is not a betrayal of the person who did not continue, that the world which held you both does not love you more for having lived. It simply held you both with the same indifference, the same terrible equality, and what you do with the continuation that indifference has given you is your responsibility and yours alone. Let me talk about the film symbols and motifs. Because Apex uses recurring visual and narrative images with more consistency and intelligence than its critical reception has generally acknowledged. The compass, Tommy's compass, the lucky compass that he mentions in the film's opening sequence, the compass that he says is warning him that their luck may have run out, becomes the film's central symbolic object. And it is a beautifully chosen symbol because a compass is simultaneously the most practical and the most metaphorical object imaginable. Its practical function is orientation. It tells you which direction you are facing. It connects you to a fixed point, mathematic knot, that exists independently of where you are, that persists regardless of how lost you become, that gives you a reference from which every other direction can be derived. Metaphorically, Tommy's compass is the film's way of asking, what is Sasha's fixed point now? What is the north she is orienting by? Before his death, the answer was clear. He was her fixed point. Their shared life, their shared love of the extreme and the possible, their shared grammar of risk and trust, and the specific intimacy of two people who have chosen to be most fully alive in the same dangerous places. Key was the reference from which every other direction in her life was derived. After his death, the compass becomes a problem because the fixed point it was oriented by is gone, and a compass that points towards something that no longer exists is not a guide, it is a weight. It is the past insisting on its relevance to a present that has moved beyond it in ways the past cannot acknowledge. The film's final image, or very nearly its final image, which I will discuss in more detail in the spoiler section, involves what Sasha does with the compass, and I will not reveal it here. But I will say that what she does with it is the film's clearest statement of its emotional argument. The statement that survival requires not the abandonment of the past, but the reorientation of the self, the finding of a new fixed point, or the discovery that you can navigate without one, that the internal compass that was always there, beneath the external one, is sufficient. The water motif runs through Apex with a consistency that I believe is entirely deliberate and entirely meaningful. Water appears in almost every significant sequence of the film. The ice of the troll wall, the river in the Blue Mountains, the specific quality of rain when it comes, the waterfall, and in the film's closing moments, the ocean. Water in the symbolic register that Apex consistently uses is the element of continuation, of flow, of movement that cannot be stopped, that finds its way through rock and around obstacles and over edges and always, inevitably, toward the larger body that is its destination. Sasha's relationship with water changes across the film in a way that maps precisely onto her emotional arc. In the early sequences, water is something to be managed and controlled, a variable in the extreme sports equation, an element that requires the application of specific technical skills to navigate safely. Oh boy, the middle of the film, water has become the thing she cannot control. The river takes her, the rain obscures her, the landscape uses water as an instrument of threat and obstacle. And by the end, water has become something else again, something that is not threatening and is not controllable, but is simply present. Simply continuing, simply doing what it has always done, which is to move from where it is toward where it is going, regardless of the weather or the obstacles or the things that have happened in the spaces it has passed through. There is a reading of this water symbolism that connects directly to the film's emotional argument about grief. Grief is water that you try to dam, you try to stop it. You try to control how much of it reaches you and when and with what force, and the wilderness strips away every dam you have built. The Australian landscape does not permit the managed approach to emotional experience that a person can maintain in ordinary life, in the city, in the routine, in the social performance of being okay. The wilderness is too immediate, too present, too demanding of the full attention of the body and the mind. It does not leave room for emotional management. And so the grief comes unmanaged at the worst possible moments, in the middle of a climb, in the middle of a chase, in the middle of an exhaustion so profound that the defenses are gone and what is left is simply the truth of what you feel. And the film is arguing, quietly through image and motif rather than through statement, that this is the necessary thing. that the grief that was being managed was also being extended, that the control was also a kind of continuation of the wound rather than a healing of it, and that the wilderness, which seems like the worst possible place to lose control of your grief, is paradoxically the place where losing control becomes possible and therefore eventually survivable. Let me talk about the motif of the tent. The portal-edge tent on the troll wall, that paper lantern structure suspended on the vertical face of the mountain, a home built in the place where there should be only void, is one of the film's most resonant images, and it returns in transformed versions across the film. The bivouacs and shelters that Sasha constructs or discovers in the Australian wilderness, the cave system that becomes briefly a refuge, the specific quality of enclosed space that recurs whenever the film wants to suggest the possibility of safety, however temporary, however conditional. What the tent represents in the film's symbolic register is the human need to make a home in the impossible, to establish, however temporarily and however fragilely, a space that is yours, a space that the world has not made for you, but that you have made in the world. The portalage on the troll wall is an act of imagination as much as an act of engineering. It says, we can be at home here, we can sleep here, we can be still and warm and together even here, in the most inhospitable place imaginable. Sasha's ability to find those spaces in the Australian wilderness, to identify the places where the landscape offers a moment of shelter, to use the terrain's own geometry as a resource rather than simply as an obstacle, is one of the film's ways of arguing for her fundamental resilience. Not the resilience of combat, the resilience of habitation, the human capacity to make a home wherever it is possible to make one, and sometimes in places where it does not seem possible at all. Ben's relationship with the landscape is explicitly contrasted with this. He does not make a home in the wilderness. He has made the wilderness his domain, which is entirely different. A domain is about ownership and control. A home is about belonging and love. And this distinction between the person who has made the wild world their domain and the person who has learned to find moments of home within it is one of the film's clearest expressions of the moral difference between its two central characters. Let me spend some time now on the film's resonance with the real world, because Apex, whatever its structural limitations, is genuinely engaged with the current cultural movement in ways that I think are worth examining carefully. The film is at one level everyday engagement with the question of what survival cinema means when the person surviving is a woman. I have already discussed this in the context of the cultural movement the film was born into. But I want to go further here, because the specific register in which Apex engages this question is more nuanced and more interesting than the simple inversion of the damsel in distress narrative that the premise might suggest. The most reductive version of this kind of film, and there are many such films in recent cinema, simply replaces the vulnerable woman with a capable one and asks the audience to cheer. The capable woman dispatches her attackers with efficiency and wit, the camera admires her competence, and the film's feminist credential is established by the simple fact of her victory. This is not an unpleasant kind of film, but it is not a particularly interesting one because it has not actually engaged with the deeper question, it has simply switched the poles. Apex does something more complicated. It is interested not just in whether Sasha wins, but in what winning costs, in what it requires her to become, in what she has to do, what she has to access in herself, what she has to be willing to do to another human being in order to survive. And in that interest, in that willingness to look at the complexity of survival rather than just its result, the film engages with something genuinely true about the experience of being a person who is forced to fight for their life. Because here is what this film understands about survival that more comfortable versions of this story prefer not to examine. Survival in genuine extremity does not feel like triumph. It does not feel like the movie moment of the raised fist and the swelling score. It feels like the discovery of something in yourself that you did not know was there, and that discovery is not entirely comfortable. The capability that extremity unlocks is real. The resilience that the wilderness forces into visibility is real. But so is the knowledge, the specific, intimate knowledge that comes only from having needed it, that you contain within yourself the capacity for things you could not previously have imagined. Sasha does things in the film's second half that the Sasha of the Norwegian prologue, the woman sleeping peacefully in her paper lantern tent on the vertical face of the mountain, the woman whose relationship with the extreme world was organized around joy and love and the shared language of two people who had found their home at the edge of the possible, could not have imagined doing. And the film does not present these things as triumphs. Exactly, it presents them as necessities, as the cost of continuing, and in that presentation, in the refusal to make the survival film costless, is a genuine honesty about what survival actually is, not the affirmation of your best self, the revelation of your most essential self, which is not always the same thing. This is what cinema at its most honest does with the survival story. It does not let you leave the theater feeling simply good about the person who made it. It asks you to think about what they had to carry in order to make it, to feel the weight of that as well as the triumph of the arrival. Apex does this. Imperfectly, inconsistently, with the limitations I have already detailed, but it does it. And in a landscape of survival cinema that too often prefers the triumphant simplicity, the imperfect honesty of Apex is worth something real. There is one more thing that Apex understands about human experience that I want to name directly because it is the thing that connects all of the film's other insights into a coherent emotional argument. It is the thing that the film is saying about love specifically, not romantic love, though that is present in Tommy's absence, in the absence that shapes everything, but the specific kind of love that the film is most deeply interested in, the love of the world itself, the love of being alive in a world that is larger and more powerful and more ancient than you are, and that will continue without you, and that is beautiful and terrible and completely indifferent to your needs and your history. Sasha came to the Australian wilderness partly in grief and partly in guilt, but she came also because she loves this. She loves the world at this scale. She loves the encounter with the real, the physical real, the world as it actually is before human beings have organized it into comfort and safety and predictability. She loves the aliveness that comes from being genuinely at risk, genuinely uncertain, genuinely dependent on the full extent of her capabilities rather than the comfortable fraction that ordinary life requires. And the film is asking, does that love survive what happens to her here? Does the wilderness that tries to kill her also kill her love of the wilderness? Or does the love persist through the trek, not unchanged, not the same love it was, but recognizable, still present, still real? The compass tells you how the film answers that question, but the deeper answer, the answer that lives in the body of the film rather than in its final image, is already present, long before the end. It is present every time Sasha, in the middle of genuine mortal danger, notices something about the landscape that is not relevant to her survival, a particular quality of light on rock, the sound of water finding its way through stone, the sky glimpsed between two cliff faces, the specific blue of an Australian afternoon at altitude. She notices it in the middle of everything. She cannot help it. And that noticing, that involuntary attention to beauty in the midst of genuine danger, is the film's argument that the love is not destroyed, that it is in a certain way the thing that is most resistant to destruction, the thing that persists when everything else has been stripped away. This is what I mean when I say that Apex in its best moments is genuinely alive. This is what the film knows at its deepest level, even when the screenplay does not always give that knowledge the full space it deserves. The love of the world is not a soft thing. It is the hardest, most enduring, most essentially human thing. And when a survival film finds a way to argue for that love, not by making survival easy, but by making it matter, it has done something that goes beyond Chandra. Now, in a different film, I would use this ninth movement to discuss where a film sits within its franchise or series. Apex is not a franchise film in the conventional sense. It does not arrive trailing sequels or spin offs or an expanded universe of interconnected stories It is, as far as current information suggests, a standalone work, which is itself a choice worth noting in 2026 when the gravitational pull of franchise filmmaking exerts enormous pressure on every major studio production. But there is a larger story that Apex is part of, and I think that story is worth examining here. Because this film does not exist in isolation, it exists in conversation with a lineage of cinema, a lineage of survival films, of wilderness films, of films about women in extremes that extends back decades and that Apex both honors and, in certain respects, genuinely advances. The most dangerous game lineage that I mentioned earlier, the Hunt film, the human on human predator story, has produced a remarkably varied body of work across cinema history. From the classic 1932 adaptation through Predator and its sequels, through Surviving the Game, through The Hunt and its self aware genre commentary, through the more recent and more tonally varied examples like Your Next and Ready or Not, each iteration of this premise asks the same essential question in a different register: what does it mean when a human being decides that another human being is prey? What does that decision reveal about the predator? And what does surviving it reveal about the person who was hunted? Apex sits in this lineage and does something specific with it that not all its predecessors have done. It takes the psychological dimension of the hunt seriously enough to use it as the film's primary emotional arena rather than simply as its genre engine. The hunt is not just the plot of Apex. The hunt is the metaphor through which the film explores everything else it is interested in. The hunt is grief made external. The hunt is guilt given human form and agency. The hunt is the question of whether you deserve to continue forced into a physical confrontation that does not allow for the abstract evasions of ordinary psychological self punishment. In this specific contribution to the lineage, this specific way of using the hunt premise as emotional and philosophical vehicle rather than simply as thriller machinery, Apex advances the conversation. It adds something to the tradition that was not fully there before. Not the hunting, not the wilderness, not the capable female survivor, but this specific combination: the grief organized psychology, the guilt as motivation, the landscape as externalized interiority, the survival as emotional argument rather than simply as physical triumph. Whether this advancement is enough to make Apex a genuinely significant film in the long term, a film that people would return to in 5 or 10 years as a touchstone of what this moment in survival cinema was capable of, is a question I cannot answer with certainty. What I can say is that the film makes a genuine contribution. It asks its questions seriously. It advances its argument with real intelligence at its best moments. And in a genre that often settles for less than it could be, that seriousness of intent is itself a form of achievement. There is also a conversation about Charlize Theron as a specifically cinematic figure that Apex participates in, and I think that conversation is worth naming here. Because Taron's career represents something unusual and important in contemporary cinema, the sustained decades-long construction of a specific kind of screen presence that is simultaneously physically formidable and emotionally complex. Not one or the other, both at the same time, as a consistent commitment rather than as an occasional exception. Mad Max Fury Road was the film that crystallized this. Furiosa was the character that demonstrated definitively that a female action performance could carry an enormous film not by supplementing the physical with the emotional, but by insisting that the physical and the emotional were the same thing. That what the body does in extremity is the fullest expression of what the person is. That the way you move through a world that is trying to destroy you tells you everything important about who you are and what you believe. Atomic Blonde added a layer of psychological complexity. The old guard added mythological resonance. Monster remains in a separate category entirely, a performance so fundamentally different in register that it requires its own conversation. And then there is Apex, which I think represents a specific and important addition to this body of work, a film in which the physical capability and the emotional complexity are not simply present simultaneously but are genuinely organized around each other. Where the physical is the emotional, where the survival of the body is the argument of the soul. In this sense, Apex matters not just as an individual film but as a chapter in a larger creative biography. As the film in which Tyrone's two dominant registers, the physical and the psychological, find perhaps their most integrated expression, not the most spectacular, not the most dramatic, but the most integrated. The film where the body and the self are most completely the same thing. That integration is what Apex offers at its best. That integration is what the film is reaching for in every frame, even the frames that fall short of the reach. And understanding that this is what the film is attempting, understanding the ambition that underlies even the places where the execution disappoints, is essential to understanding what it means to give this film the rating I am going to give it, which I will get to after the spoilers, after the full reckoning, after we have gone to the places that deserve to be understood from the inside rather than from the safe distance of the unspoiled. From this moment, we go into full spoilers. If you have not yet seen this film, stop here, go experience it first, and come back. Some things deserve to be felt before they are understood. Still here? Good. Then let us go all the way in. Because the things I want to talk about now, the things that only become visible when the whole film is known, when you can hold the beginning and the ending in the same hand and feel the weight of one against the other. These are the things that made me sit in the dark after the credits rolled and stay there for a few minutes. Not overwhelmed, not transformed, but genuinely still, genuinely occupied by the film in a way that not every film manages to produce, even films that are technically better than this one. Let us begin at the very beginning, which is also where the ending begins. The troll world sequence, which I have already discussed at some length in previous sections, reveal itself fully only when you have seen the entire film, and what it reveals on a second viewing with the ending in your hands is a precision of foreshadowing that I think is genuinely the screenplay's finest achievement. Because everything that will happen in Australia is already present in Norway, not as a blueprint, not as a mechanical setup and payoff, but as a thematic and psychological preparation. As the first statement of every idea the film will later develop, the detail that anchors this, Tommy tells Sasha in the opening minutes that his compass is warning him, that the instrument he has carried as a talisman, the object that has always been his way of reading the world's intentions toward him, is telling him that their luck has run out. He says this with the lightness of someone who half believes it and half doesn't, who has a superstitious relationship with the object without being entirely governed by it. And Sasha dismisses it. She is the one who wants to keep climbing. She is the one for whom the warning is insufficient reason to stop. She is the one who prioritizes the aspiration over the caution. On a first viewing, this reads as simple character establishment. She is the more driven one. He is the more careful one. The storm will prove him right. This is how the tragedy is set up. On a second viewing, with the knowledge of where the compass ends up and what Sasha does with it at the film's close, this opening moment becomes something entirely different. It becomes the first statement of the film's central question. What do you do with the instrument that tells you your luck has run out? What do you do with the object that carries the weight of the person who understood caution better than you did? Do you carry it as guilt, as an ongoing reminder of the cost of not listening? Or do you eventually, after everything the film puts you through, find a way to set it down? The compass is present in every major section of the film after the prologue. It is on Sasha's person when she arrives in Australia. It is the object she reaches for in her quietest moments, not to navigate, not to find north, but to hold, to feel the weight of, to remind herself of what she is carrying and why. In one of the film's most understated and most effective quiet moments, she opens her palm and looks at it in the early Australian light, in that golden morning hour before the world has become threatening, and the camera stays on her face rather than on the compass. And what you see in Taron's face in that moment is a complexity that the film does not name or explain, something between tenderness and self-punishment, between love and the specific cruelty of loving something that you cannot get back. She closes her hand around it. She puts it back in her pocket. She keeps moving. This is the film doing its best work, carrying thematic weight through gesture rather than statement, trusting the audience to feel what is not said. Now let us talk about Ben's reveal. Because the film structures the revelation of who Ben actually is with more intelligence than its critics have generally acknowledged, and understanding the architecture of that reveal changes how you experience the entire second half. We first encounter Ben indirectly. Before we see him, we sense him. The film builds his presence through the landscape rather than through direct introduction. A detail in the terrain that should not be there, a sound that does not belong, the specific quality of wrongness that a trained outdoors person would recognize as the difference between a wilderness that is genuinely empty and one that is occupied by something that is choosing not to be seen. This indirect introduction is not accidental. It is the film establishing, before a word is spoken or a face is shown, that Ben is not separate from the wilderness, he is of it. He has dissolved into it in the way that a predator dissolves into its habitat, not by becoming invisible but by becoming native. By belonging to the space in a way that makes his presence feel, perversely, like a natural feature rather than an intrusion. When we do see him directly, the film makes another intelligent choice. It does not reveal his full intention immediately. The Ori sequences of their interaction have an ambiguity. Is he a threat? Is he a stranger who might be an ally? Is the danger that Sasha senses a product of her own grief-heightened anxiety rather than of actual menace? This ambiguity is held for longer than you might expect, and it does real work for the film because it keeps you inside Sasha's uncertainty rather than elevating you to the omniscient position of knowing what she does not. You are in those early sequences genuinely uncertain alongside her. And that uncertainty, that collaborative not knowing, is what makes the revelation of Ben's full nature land with genuine force when it arrives. The moment of full revelation, the moment the film removes all ambiguity about what Ben is and what he intends, is staged with a directness that I found refreshing in its refusal of further qualification. There is tendency in contemporary thrillers to hedge the villain reveal, to leave a thread of possible alternative interpretation, to maintain some residual uncertainty about motivation even after the facts are clear. Apex does not do this. When Ben's nature is fully revealed, the film commits to it absolutely is what he is. There is no further ambiguity to take shelter in. And the effect of that commitment, that refusal to soften the reveal or provide it with a sympathetic out, is the clarity that the film needs. It needs you to know without qualification what Sasha is dealing with, because the story it is telling requires that clarity. It requires the threat to be named, unambiguous. Everything else the film is doing, the emotional and thematic work, the grief and the guilt and the compass and the sky, depends on the physical danger being absolutely real and absolutely resolved. What Ben reveals about himself in this moment, not through confession but through action, not through statement but through the specific quality of choice he makes, is something that I think the film handles with more nuance than its villainous genre function reputation would suggest. Because what Ben does is not simply violent. It is organized, it has a ritual quality to it that is, in context, more disturbing than straightforward violence would be. The ritual suggests that this is not the first time, that he has done this before many times, and that he has constructed around the repetition a mythology of meaning, a private cosmology in which what he is doing is not just permissible but necessary. Not just allowed, but required. The ranger's warning in the film's opening section, the casual mention of dozens of disappearances in the Wandara region, acquires its full horror here. Those dozens were not accidents. They were not the ordinary attrition of a hostile wilderness claiming the unlucky or the unprepared. They were Ben. Each one was Ben. And the wilderness has been absorbing the evidence with its characteristic indifference, keeping the secret not out of complicity, but out of the simple fact that it does not distinguish between one kind of death and another. The river does not know whether the body in it arrived by accident or by intent. The rock does not know whether the blood on it belongs to a climber who slipped or to a person who was hunted. The wilderness keeps no moral inventory. And Ben has used that indifference as cover, has organized his violence around the landscape's neutrality, has turned the world's most fundamental quality, its not caring, into a weapon. This is, I think, the film's most genuinely chilling idea. Not Ben as a character, but Ben as the embodiment of a specific and genuine danger that the world's indifference creates, the danger of the person who understands that the absence of cosmic judgment is a kind of permission, that if the universe does not care, then neither does he need to, that the natural world's neutrality is a license rather than a warning, and Sasha, whose relationship with that same neutrality has always been one of love, who has always found in the world's not caring a kind of freedom, a release from the social performance of ordinary life, a space in which she could be simply a body in a world of physics and weather and stone, must now reckon with the fact that the same quality she has always loved about wilderness is the quality that made it possible for Ben to become what he is. The world that set her free is also the world that set him free. The indifference that she has always experienced as liberation is also the indifference that licensed his violence. This is the film's most morally complex insight, and it is present in the film even though the screenplay does not fully articulate it in those terms. It is in the structure of the thing. It is in the fact that Ben and Sasha share a relationship with wilderness that is formally identical. Both have organized their lives around the extreme. Both have gone further into the wild than ordinary people go. Both have found their fullest selves in the space beyond the social, while being morally opposite in every way that matters. And that former similarity, the parallel structure that reveals a moral difference rather than a moral equivalence, is what makes their confrontation genuinely interesting rather than simply threatening. Let me now walk through the major turning points of the film's second half, with the specificity that the spoiler section warrants. The trap sequence is the film's first genuine pivot point, the moment where Sasha transitions from reactive to something approaching strategic. I want to be precise about what happens here and why it matters so much for everything that follows. Ben sets a trap for Sasha that she partially falls into, the bear trap without teeth, the mechanical device that does not cut but does hold, does not wound catastrophically but does compromise. And the film is careful about how it handles the immediate aftermath of this, because this is the moment where lesser thriller would have its protagonist display an almost supernatural resilience, would have her escape the trap and immediately resume at full capacity, as though the experience were simply another obstacle to be overcome. Apex does something more honest and more dramatically interesting. It shows you the cost, the specific physical, realistic cost of a body that has sustained damage in a particular way and must now navigate a hostile landscape with that damage as a permanent variable in every subsequent calculation. This is where the film's commitment to physical honesty serves it most directly and most powerfully, because by establishing clearly and without flinching that Sasha is now operating with a compromised lower body, that the game has changed at the level of simple physics, the film shifts the nature of the confrontation from one of physical equality to one of physical disadvantage navigated by intelligence. She cannot outrun him now. She cannot rely on the specific capabilities that have defined her all her life, the climbing ability, the speed, the endurance of a body fully operative at maximum capacity. She must find a different way, and finding that different way is where the film moves from being a survival story into something closer to what I described earlier, an argument, a philosophical argument conducted in the language of bodies and landscapes. What Sasha does with the trap injury, how she adapts, how she compensates, how she restructures her understanding of the terrain around the new limitations of her body, is, I think, the film's most quietly intelligent extended sequence. Because it is not simply problem solving. It is a translation of an interior resource, the specific quality of mind that says, something has changed and I cannot change it back, so I must change what I do with it, into physical action. It is adaptive intelligence as the deepest form of resilience, not a resilience of continuing to do what you have always done, the resilience of discovering what else you can do, what other capabilities you have that you have not needed until now. Because until now, the capabilities you always relied on were sufficient. And here is the foreshadowing that only becomes visible retrospectively. This is what the grief of Tommy has been doing to her all along, in the 5 months before the film's Australian section. It has injured her, not her body, but herself. It has compromised the capabilities she has always relied on, the ease in the world, the trust in her own judgment, the sense of deserving the life she has chosen. And she has been in those 5 months trying to navigate a hostile landscape with that specific damage as a permanent variable. The trap injury in the physical realm mirrors the grief injury in the psychological one. And what Sasha has to learn in Australia, how to continue effectively with a body that is no longer fully operative, is the same thing she has been failing to learn in the 5 months since Norway. How to continue meaningfully with a self that is no longer fully intact. The cave system sequence is the film's most spatially complex extended passage, and Lauren Shear's work here is, I think, the single most technically accomplished thing in the film. Because the caves represent the complete inversion of the film's established spatial grammar. Everything up to this point has been organized around the horizontal, the ground level chase, the river, the forest floor, the cliff face read as a vertical challenge to be negotiated rather than as altitude to be celebrated. The caves collapse even the horizontal, they eliminate the sky entirely. They reduce the spatial world to a series of passages that are tight and dark and ambiguous, where the sound behaves differently than it does in open space, where the body must move in ways it was not designed for, where the sense of direction that has been the film's consistent spatial reference point, north on the compass, the sky above, the river below, is suddenly unreliable. And what Cher does with the drone camera in these sequences is, reportedly, something that required extensive technical innovation. The standard drone could not navigate the cave passages, not because of the technical limitations of the drone itself, but because of the acoustic complexity of the space. The drone's normal operation produces sound signature that, in open air, is negligible relative to the ambient sound of the wilderness. In the enclosed acoustic environment of a cave, the drone would have been present in the soundtrack in a way that would have destroyed the sequence's atmospheric integrity. The solution, according to interviews with the production team, involved acoustic dampening modifications to the drone's housing and motor system that were, at the time of production, genuinely novel applications of existing technology. I mention this not just as an interesting production fact, but because of what it means for the experience of watching those sequences. The work that was done to make the camera invisible in the cave, to maintain the integrity of the sonic environment even while the camera was physically present in it, contributes directly to the specific quality of those scenes. The feeling that you are genuinely inside the space. That the darkness is real darkness and the tight passages are genuinely tight, and the sound of Sasha's breathing in that enclosed space is the actual sound of a person's breathing in an enclosed space, not a reconstruction of it. The cave sequences have a documentary quality, a quality of having been recorded rather than staged. That is one of the film's most distinctive achievements, and it is an achievement that depended on a technical innovation that most audiences will never know existed. The cave system is also where the film stages one of its most important psychological revelations, one that I want to spend considerable time on because it is the moment that, more than any other, reveals the full interior logic of what Sasha is experiencing. This is the moment I gestured toward in the non-spoilers section when I said that the film, in its middle passage, asks whether Sasha wants to survive. She is in the cave. She is compromised. Ben knows the system has used it before clearly as part of his operational landscape, and she does not. The darkness is nearly complete. The passage she has taken has narrowed to something that requires her to move in a way that her trap-injured leg makes genuinely agonizing. And there is a moment, a hard moment, the kind of editorial decision that I discussed Itherson making in the non-spoiler section, where the film gives us Sasha completely still, not resting, not planning. Simply still, in the dark, with the compass in her hand. And what Taron does in that moment is the finest sustained acting I have seen in any thriller in years. Because what she shows you, without words, without the operatic processing of feeling, without the conventional signals of emotional performance, is a person conducting a conversation with herself. A conversation about whether the effort required to get out of this cave, back into the light, away from Ben, through the wilderness, back to the world, whether that effort is one she is willing to make. whether the version of herself that exists on the other side of all of that is someone she wants to reach. And you see the moment she decides, it is not dramatic, it is not a cinematic epiphany, it is something smaller and more real than that. A specific quality of intake of breath, a change in the quality of presence in her eyes. A decision made not at the level of feeling but at the level of something more fundamental than feeling, the level of the body's basic orientation toward the future, which asserts itself before the mind has fully endorsed it. She puts the compass back in her pocket. She begins to move. I have watched this scene 3 times, and each time what moves me about it is the same thing. It is not that she decides to survive, it is that she discovers that she has already decided, at a level below conscious choice, that the decision was made by something in her that does not need her endorsement. And that this discovery, the discovery that the will to continue is not something she is choosing to perform, but something she actually, genuinely, inescapably is the film's emotional center. The moment around which everything else orbits, the moment that the compass throw at the end is really about. Let us talk about the tables turning sequence in the film's third act, because this is where Apex most clearly announces its genre intentions, while simultaneously doing something more interesting than those intentions alone would suggest. The shift from Sasha as hunter to Sasha as hunter is not a sudden reversal. The film is too intelligent for that. It is a gradual reorientation, a series of microshifts in the power dynamic that accumulate over several sequences until the weight of the balance has moved decisively. And the way the film stages these microshifts is, I think, one of Son's finest editorial achievements. Each small moment of partially gaining initiative is cut slightly differently from the previous one. The first, a near miss that is more luck than design, is cut reactively, the editing responding to the action rather than anticipating it. The second, a moment where she uses the terrain to her advantage in a way that Ben does not fully account for, is cut with a slightly longer anticipatory beat, the editing suggesting that she saw this possibility a fraction before it materialized. The third, where the design is clearly hers, where she has made a calculation and the calculation has worked, is cut with a confidence that mirrors the confidence of the choice. By the time the full reversal has occurred, the editing has trained you, through these incremental donorships, to feel the change before the plot announces it. The cutting has been doing emotional preparation work. It has been teaching you frame by frame that the person you are watching is not the same person she was at the beginning of this sequence. This is craftsmanship that operates below the level of conscious perception. Most audiences will not notice that the editing rhythm has been doing this. They will simply feel, by the time the reversal is fully apparent, that it is entirely earned, that it makes sense, that it arrived not as a plot development, but as an inevitability. And that feeling of inevitability, that sense that the reversal was always going to happen because this is who Sasha is, even when who she is has not been fully visible until now, is one of the most difficult things for a thriller to achieve, and one of the things that Apex achieves most completely, the confrontation. Let me be precise and careful about the film's climactic confrontation because it is the sequence that generates the most genuine disagreement among the film's critics and audience, and I think that disagreement is itself revealing about what the film is attempting. The confrontation between Sasha and Ben in the film's final act is staged in a space that is simultaneously the most dramatic and the most symbolically significant in the Australian landscape. It occurs at a point where the geography creates a specific and inescapable condition. There is nowhere else to go. The terrain has been narrowing throughout the film's third act. The crevasses tightening, the passages constricting, the sky increasingly present as the landscape rises towards something, and the confrontation happens at the place where the constriction reaches its terminus, where the only remaining directions are toward each other or over the edge. What makes the staging so interesting, and what I think some critics have misled as simply spectacular rather than meaningfully spectacular, is the way it literalizes the film's central argument. The edge is the apex, the highest point of the geography, the place where the terrain has no further argument to make, where the only thing above you is sky and the only thing below you is the fold. And both Sasha and Ben arrive at this point simultaneously, which means that the film is not simply staging a confrontation at a dramatic location. It is asking, who belongs at the apex? Who has earned the right to the highest point? And the answer the film gives, the answer that is argued physically and emotionally and symbolically at the same time, is not the one that Ben's cosmology would predict. Ben believes that the apex belongs to whoever can take it, to the strongest, to the most fit in the Darwinian sense, the most ruthless, the most adapted to the requirements of pure survival. His entire philosophy is organized around this belief. The natural world is a hierarchy, and the hierarchy is a moral order, and he is at the top of it because he has made himself at the top of it. The apex is his by right of dominance. Sasha arrives at the apex by a different logic entirely. She arrives there not because she is stronger, but because she is more complete, because she has more reasons to be there, more things she is moving toward rather than simply away from, because her relationship with the world is organized around love and connection and the shared language of two people who chose the extreme together, even when that choosing cost everything. She is at the apex because the love that organized her life, the love that brought her to the troll wall in the first place, the love that she has been trying to determine whether she deserves to continue carrying, has turned out to be the most durable thing she owns. More durable than the guilt, more durable than the grief, more durable than Ben's philosophy, more durable than the wilderness itself, which is saying something, given that the wilderness is a few 100 million years old. The physical mechanics of the confrontation I will leave for you to discover or remember. What I want to talk about is what the film does after the confrontation is resolved, because the aftermath is where Apex either fully becomes the film it wants to be or reveals the gap between its ambitions and its execution most clearly. The moments immediately following the resolution of the physical confrontation are, I think, the most quietly powerful in the film. Taron plays them with a specificity that I have already described in the context of the cave scene, but that reaches a different register here, because this is not the cave scene. This is not the decision to survive. This is the discovery of what surviving actually feels like, and it does not feel like triumph. It does not feel like the music swelling catharsis that the genre contract promises. It feels like the specific exhaustion of a body that has done everything it was capable of and has arrived at a place it was not certain it would reach. It feels like the morning after the storm, still, cold, irrevocably present. What the film does in these aftermath minutes, the specific quality of time it allows to pass before the narrative mechanics of resolution take over, is one of its finest tonal achievements. It resists the temptation to immediately comfort, to immediately provide the audience with the warm resolution of knowing that everything is now going to be alright. It sits for a few minutes in the genuine uncertainty of what comes next. Not the narrative uncertainty of whether Sasha will survive, that question is resolved, but the emotional uncertainty of what the survival means, of who she is, having done what she has done, of what the world looks like from this specific place at this specific altitude with these specific hands after all of this. And in that uncertainty, in the film's willingness to hold it rather than immediately resolve it, is a genuine artistic courage that I want to name and honor directly. Because the temptation to close a thriller with a clean emotional resolution is enormous, and it is a temptation supported by every commercial consideration the film faces. Audiences want to feel good at the end. They want the catharsis. They want the music and the light and the sense that the person they have spent 95 minutes with is going to be okay in a way that they can believe in and feel peaceful about. Apex gives you the beginning of that feeling, but it gives it to you earned rather than assumed. And the difference between those two things, between the catharsis that is constructed and the catharsis that is arrived at, is the difference between a film that manipulates your emotions and a film that genuinely moves you. Let me talk about the excavation scene, the moment where the authorities, following whatever trail has been left by the events of the film, discover the bodies Ben has been accumulating. This scene is brief. It is not dwelt upon. The film does not use it for shock or for the kind of horror reveal that would turn the discovery into spectacle. It handles it with the restraint of a film that has been throughout more interested in what things mean than in what they look like. But it matters enormously for what it does to the moral landscape of the story's conclusion, because it confirms something that the film has been arguing implicitly throughout. The wilderness was not a safe space even before Ben arrived. The dozens of disappearances were not accidents of terrain or weather, they were the ongoing consequence of a philosophy. Ben's philosophy, the philosophy that says some lives matter more than others and that the natural world endorses the taking of the ones that matter less. The excavation is the physical evidence of what that philosophy caused, not in the abstract, in specific, individual, irreversible human terms. Each set of remains in that excavation is a person who had a compass, metaphorically speaking, a fixed point they were oriented by, a future they were moving toward, and Ben's philosophy, applied with consistency over time, erased all of it. The excavation scene is also the moment that most directly addresses the film's real world resonance, because the violence Ben enacts is not mythological. It is not the violence of a supernatural threat or an alien predator or a force that exists outside the bounds of ordinary human experience. It is the violence of man who has decided that his enjoyment of the world matters more than other people's lives, who has found a space, physical and psychological, where the ordinary structures that prevent that decision from being enacted are absent, and who has used that absence systematically and over time to do what the ordinary social contract prevents him from doing in the spaces where the contract still holds. This is not a metaphor, this is a description of something real, of a genuine category of violence that the world contains. And by setting it in the wilderness, by making the landscape's neutrality the condition that enables Ben's violence rather than the cause of it, the film is making an argument about where that violence actually comes from. Not from the wilderness, not from the absence of civilization, from a specific and human decision, from a specific and human philosophy, from the choice made by a person who could choose otherwise to regard other human beings as prey. The discovery of the bodies does not provide Sasha with closure. The film is too honest for that. Closure is not how Grease and Kate actually work. The bodies in the excavation do not retroactively repair the rope she forgot to secure. They do not give Tommy back. They do not resolve the 5 months of silence or the specific weight of a compass that points toward a fixed point that no longer exists. What they do, and this is what I think the scene is actually about, is situate Sasha's experience within a larger context. They remind her and us that she is not the only person whose relationship with the wilderness has been complicated by violence and loss, that the specific geography she has moved through carries the weight of many lives, many stories, many private cosmologies that ended in the same indifferent rock and water. This contextualizing does something unexpected and important to the film's emotional logic. It makes Sasha's survival less personal, and in making it less personal, it paradoxically makes it more meaningful, because the survival that matters is not simply her survival, it is the demonstration that Ben's philosophy is wrong, that the apex does not belong to the most ruthless, that the natural world's neutrality is not an endorsement of dominance, that the person who goes to the wilderness organized by love, even love that has been shattered, even love that is now carried as grief and guilt rather than as joy, can find her way through it, can reach the other side, can stand at the highest point and find that she is still, against all the evidence of the last few months, oriented, still pointing toward something, still alive in the fullest sense of the word. The beach, the final sequence, Sasha at the ocean. This is the sequence that closes the film, and I want to spend the most time here of anywhere in this spoiler section, because it is the sequence that determines whether everything that preceded it adds up to something, and I believe, with certain qualifications, that it does. The ocean is not the wilderness she has just survived. It is not the Blue Mountains. It is not the ancient red orange rock of the Australian interior. The ocean is something older than all of that, something that predates the landscape itself, something that connects, and this is not a small detail, given the film's structure, to Norway, to the beginning, to the salt water that surrounds the Troll Wall on three sides. In Coming to the Ocean, Sasha is completing a circuit that began when she was suspended on the vertical face of a mountain above a different body of the same water. She has the compass in her hand. And what she does with it, the specific gesture, the specific quality of intention with which she does it, the specific quality of stillness that follows, is the film's final and fullest statement of its emotional argument. She throws it into the water. Now, there are two ways to read this gesture, and I want to hold both of them rather than immediately resolving the ambiguity, because I think the ambiguity is the point. I think the gesture is designed to mean different things to different people watching it, depending on what they have brought into the film and what the film has done with what they brought. The first reading is one of release, of completion. The compass belongs to the water now, to the element that connects Norway and Australia, that connects the beginning of the film to its end, that has been the film's consistent motif of continuation and flow. Tommy belonged to the world, he belonged to the wild places. He is not erased by being released, he is returned. The compass going into the water is not a rejection of him. It is not a forgetting. It is an acknowledgement that his fixed point is not something she needs to carry externally anymore. That she has, through the experience of the Phil, the survival of Australia, the confrontation with Ben's philosophy, the discovery in the cave that the will to continue is not something she needs to choose, but something she simply, fundamentally already is, internalized the orientation that the compass represented. She knows which way is not now without needing the instrument. The fixed point is inside her. The second reading is less comfortable. In this reading, the compass throw is not release but something closer to severance, the gesture of someone who has had to do things in the Australian wilderness, in the confrontation with Ben, in the specific extremity of genuine survival, that have changed her relationship with the person who carried that compass, who loved that compass, who said it was warning him, who perhaps would not have been entirely comfortable with some of what she has had to become in order to survive. The compass through in this reading is a goodbye that is not fully peaceful, a farewell to the version of herself that Tommy loved, as well as to Tommy himself. An acknowledgement that the person standing on this beach is not the person who was sleeping in the portage tent on the troll wall, and that the person who was sleeping in that tent is not coming back. I do not think these two readings are mutually exclusive. I think they are simultaneous. I think the film is in its final image, doing what the best final images do, holding multiple truths at once without resolving them into a single simpler truth. The compass throw is release and it is loss. It is completion and it is grief. It is the gesture of someone who has arrived somewhere and the gesture of someone who knows that arriving is not the same as healing. And Taron, in the final minutes of the film, plays exactly this complexity. The face she brings to the ocean, the specific quality of presence, the specific way she holds her body in the wind of the water, is not the face of triumph. It is not the face of peace exactly. It is the face of someone who has done what needed to be done and who is now standing on the other side of it and finding that the other side is real, that it is solid ground, that she can stand on it, that she is standing on it, and that is being here, being upright, being alive in the full and complicated sense of the word, is sufficient. Not perfect, not without cost, not the life she had planned or the self she expected to be, but sufficient. Sufficient is not a word that cinema uses often as an emotional resolution. Cinema prefers triumph or tragedy or transcendence. Sufficient is quieter and harder and I think truer, because in real human experience, in the real experience of loss and guilt, and the specific kind of survival that requires you to become someone you did not anticipate becoming, the arrival point is rarely triumphant or tragic or transcendent. It is usually sufficient. It is usually the discovery that you are still here, still oriented, still in possession of the will to continue, and the love of the word that made continuing worth attempting. It is usually the feeling of standing on solid ground and finding that you can stand on it, which is not nothing, which is in fact everything. The film has no post-credits scene. This is the right choice. Anything after that final image would be a diminishment. The ocean is the last word. The compass in the water is the last word. the stillness on Taram's face, and then the cutting away, and then the dark that is the last word. And in the dark, if you sit with it for a moment before the next algorithmic recommendation arrives and ask for your attention, you might find that the film has done something to you. Not the same thing it will do to everyone, not a single defined effect that can be listed in a critical summary, but something. Something quiet and specific and genuinely earned. That is the film. All of it. The Norway and the Australia and the compass and the river and the cave and the apex and the ocean. That is what it is, and what it means, and what it costs, and what it gives back. Now let me tell you what it left behind in me. There is a kind of film that does not ask you to remember it, it asks something more difficult than that. It asks you to carry it, not the plot, not the performances, not the specific mechanics of what happened to whom and in what sequence, but something smaller and more persistent than all of that, an image, a feeling, a question that the film asked and then left open, trusting you to sit with the openness rather than demanding that it be filled. Apex is, for me, that kind of film. Imperfectly, partially, with all the qualifications I have already named and will not name again here, because this section is not the place for qualifications. This section is the place for honesty about what the film actually left inside me when the credits rolled and the dark arrived and I sat with it for a moment before the world asked me to move on. What stayed was the cave, not the action of the cave sequence, not the specifics of what happens there, which I have already discussed. The feeling of it, the specific quantity of darkness that the film creates in that sequence, a darkness that is not simply the absence of light but a presence in itself, a weight, a condition that the body must negotiate rather than simply endure. And inside that darkness, a person deciding, not heroically, not with the music swelling and the light returning at precisely the right moment, simply deciding, with a breath and a change in the eyes and the hand closing around a compass and a body beginning, quietly and without announcement, to move. I keep coming back to that breath, to that specific moment of decision that Charlize Theron plays, not as a performance of determination but as the actual thing. The thing before determination, the thing that determination is built on, the basic animal irreducible orientation of a living body toward the continuation of its own life. And what makes it moving, what makes it the moment I carry from this film rather than any of the more spectacular moments that surround it, is that it is not simply survival instinct. It is survival instinct discovered after 5 months of not being entirely sure it was still there. The rediscovery of the will to continue, in the dark alone, with a broken body and a compass that no longer points to the person who mattered most. That is the moment. That is what the film gave me. Did it change how I see something? Yes, though not in the large categorical way that the films that truly remake you change how you see things. It changed something smaller and more specific. It reminded me, and this is the kind of thing that a film can do that a conversation or essay or direct statement usually cannot, because the body receives it differently than the mind does. It reminded me that the will to continue is not a choice that you make from above, from some high rational position where all the options are visible and you select the one that makes the most sense. It is something that asserts itself from below, from the oldest and most inarticulate part of what you are, and that its assertion, even when the mind has not yet endorsed it, even when the circumstances have not yet warranted it, is itself a kind of grace, a kind of gift from the body to the self. Would I return to Apex? Yes. Not immediately. Not the way I would return to a film that I found overwhelming, or that I needed to experience again to fully understand. But in some months, when the specific memory of the plot has faded, and what remains is the feeling of it, yes, I would sit with the cave again. I would sit with the page and the compass and the ocean. I would give myself the experience of that final image again, knowing what it cost to earn it. Who will carry this film? The people who will carry Apex with them are, I think, a specific kind of person. Not necessarily cinema lovers in the conventional sense, not necessarily people who care about cinematography or editing rhythm or the precise architecture of a survival thriller's tonal development. The people who will carry this film are people who know what it is to survive something they were not certain they wanted to survive. People who have had the specific experience of standing on the other side of loss and finding that the other side is real, that it is solid ground, that you can stand on it, but that standing on it does not feel exactly as you had expected. People for whom the word sufficient, not triumphant, not healed, not transformed, but sufficient, lands with the specific weight of something that is genuinely true about their own experience. For those people, Apex will be more than a well made thriller, it will be a companion. A piece of art that understands something they know and is willing to say it in the particular language of bodies and landscapes and the specific quality of a breath taken in the dark. Now let me give you the complete honest picture. Apex is a film that carries genuine craft, genuine ambition, and genuine emotional intelligence at its core, and that does not always sustain all three of those things simultaneously across its full runtime. The cinematography by Lauren Shar is without qualification exceptional. The performance by Charlize Theron is the finest sustained work she has done in the action thriller register, and in its quietest moments edges into something that transcends that register entirely. The score by Cine Egerton treats grief as a landscape rather than an emotion, and does so with a musical intelligence that most films of this kind never reach for, let alone achieve. And the specific geographic decision, the commitment to the actual Blue Mountains of New South Wales, the refusal to substitute convenience for truth, gives the film a visual and experiential specificity that no amount of production design could have manufactured. Against these achievements, the screenplay's underserving of its own emotional architecture remains a real limitation. The character of Ben, for all that Egerton brings to him, is not fully built. The quieter emotional passages between the action sequences are sometimes too compressed to carry the full weight they are being asked to carry. And there is a tonal inconsistency in the film's second half that briefly disrupts the coherent register that the first hour establishes with such confidence. The gap between those two accounting columns, the achievements and the limitations, is where the rating lives. Who will love this most deeply? The viewers we find Apex most fully satisfying are those who come to it primarily as a physical cinema experience, as a film about what a human body can do when the alternative to doing it is no longer surviving. For those viewers, the film delivers at the highest level. The action sequences are among the finest examples of survival thriller craft in recent memory. The landscape is extraordinary. The physical commitment of every above the line creative to telling the story as honestly and as viscerally as the real world permits is completely apparent in every frame. Who may not connect with it and why? Viewers who come to Apex expecting it to fully honor the psychological depth that its premise and its best passages promise may find themselves occasionally frustrated. Those who are looking for a villain with a three-dimensional interior life that would make the film's central confrontation fully philosophically resonant may find Egerton's performance, for all its committed craft, insufficient to fill the space the story has created for it. And those who find physical implausibility in a single sequence, a significant breach of contract, will have at least one moment where the film's otherwise strong commitment to physical honesty wavers in a way that is briefly distracting. Cinema, streaming, or something to own, this is a film that was made for large screens and good speakers. The specific achievement of Lawrence Sher's cinematography, the dramatic work, the geographic scale, the acoustic intimacy of the cave sequences rewards the biggest screen you can give it. On Netflix, it will reach its enormous global audience and do so adequately. But if you have the opportunity to watch it on a screen that can do justice to the blue mountains in morning light, to the specific quality of darkness in those caves, to the sound of water on ancient rock, take that opportunity. This is a film whose craftsmanship lives in its largest and most specific sensory details, and those details deserve space. My rating for Apex is 6.4 out of 10, and here is the one true sentence that earns it. This is a film that reaches for something genuinely meaningful, the specific and honest truth about survival as an emotional condition rather than simply a physical one, and touches it unmistakably in moments of real grace, even as it does not always have the narrative courage or the screenplay depth to sustain that touch across the full length of its story. 6.4 is not a disappointment. It is an honest measure of a film that is better than its genre requires and not quite as good as its best moments promise. It is the rating of a film that has done something genuinely worth watching and that deserves perhaps the space to do it more fully. The rating of a film I am glad exists. The rating of a film I will return to in the dark for one specific breast in one specific cave, where a woman with a broken body and a compass that points towards something that is no longer there decides, quietly and without announcement, to keep moving. That is enough. That is in the film's own language sufficient. And if I close my eyes right now, I can still see the compass going into the water. The specific arc of it, the specific quality of light on the ocean in that moment, the stillness of her face after, the cut to black, the dark that follows. Some films leave you with noise, some films leave you with light. The best ones leave you with a specific kind of quiet that only arrives after something true has been said. Apex, at its finest, leaves you with that quiet. Hold it for a moment before the next thing takes over. It is worth holding. Before I let you go, I want to say something genuine. Thank you for spending this time here at the Cine Flux. The fact that you came to a nearly 2 hour essay about a 95-minute survival thriller tells me something about you, that you are the kind of person who wants to feel cinema and understand it at the same time. That the experience of watching a film is not complete for you until you have sat with what it meant, not just what it showed. That is exactly who this channel exists for, and every time you show up here, you remind me why it is worth making. If this essay moved something in you, or challenged something, or made you see Apex differently than you had before, hit the like. Not for the algorithm, though the algorithm does notice, and it does help the channel reach the people who would love it. Hit the like because it tells me that the work mattered. And that matters to me more than the number. Subscribe if you want to keep doing this. Keep sitting in the dark with films that deserve real attention. Keep asking what they mean, not just what they show. And leave me something in the comments. Specifically, I want to know this: the Compass show release or Severance. Which reading landed for you? Was there a moment in Apex that surprised you, that got under your guard in a way you did not expect? And the question that I find most interesting: is there a film you've seen recently that does the thing that Apex only partially achieves, that takes the survival thriller premise and uses it as a genuine vehicle for psychological and emotional truth? Tell me, because that is exactly the kind of film I want to spend time with next year on this channel. As for what is coming next at the Cine Flux, I will only say that it involves a filmmaker who has been building one of the most quietly extraordinary bodies of work in contemporary cinema. A film that arrived with very little fanfare and has been doing something remarkable to everyone who has genuinely sat with it. It is a film about memory and architecture and the specific way the spaces we inhabit shape the people we become inside them. I think you are going to want to be here for that one. Until then, that is the Cine Flux. I will see you in the next one.